Welcome, viewers and listeners, to the Thinking Fans Premier League Football podcast. Each week, we get together with our besties who are current pro players, real coaches, academics, and stat heads. Today, we're joined by soccer analyst Harshal Patel and coach and analytics celebrity David Seymour. I'm host Chris Mumford. Bella ciao. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, a 300-page book for those mad about football. Moneyball for football, opposition analysis plus eye candy. The next update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Over the coming weeks, we'll be transitioning to the Thinking Fan Football Club podcast platform and YouTube. Please subscribe. Matchday 20 and 21 has been where the rubber hits the road. The league slammed in 20 matches during 7 days. The transfer window, on the other hand, seems to be a passing as a non-event. We chat through matches of note, as well as will the table get more clear or more fussed up in the coming weeks. We do a deep dive and we wrap up with transfers. Harshal, why don't you get us started off with the Southampton Arsenal match, which was probably one of the first midweek games of note. What did you see there?
Yeah, before I do that, Chris, I thought you were going to introduce David Seymour as a Tom Hardy lookalike, because to be honest, he looks a lot like Bane from The Dark Knight at the moment. But on a little more of a serious note, obviously, the Southampton Arsenal game. To be honest, Arsenal have been on a pretty decent run, and they've gone a little under the radar in the sense that they've not lost for a while in the league. Obviously, they lost to Southampton in the FA Cup, but they've not lost for a while in the league. They've been keeping a bunch of clean sheets. They've also not conceded too many goals in that time. And they've quietly made their way up the table towards the top half of the table, maybe even Europa League contention if they can keep this run of form going. And that continued in the Southampton game. I thought one thing that I wasn't expecting to see from Arteta was his use of Nicolas Pepe on the left, where, I mean, he's primarily played as a right winger, both back in France before he came over to Arsenal, since he's been at Arsenal. And it was interesting that he played him on the left, and then he had Cedric, who's a right-footed and primarily a right back, former Southampton right back, at left back, because Kieran Tierney's out for a while, and you ideally want Bukayo Saka up the field. So he didn't play him at left back. He played Saka on the right, Pepe on the left, and he had a right-footed player playing at left back. So it was Pepe providing the width to an extent, and then somewhat creating the space for Cedric to sort of underlap him at times. Although he did go out on the overlap as well, and that's something that's very reminiscent of what Pep Guardiola does quite a lot, where it'll either be the fullbacks who are providing the width or the wingers providing the width with the fullbacks tucking inside. Especially, Pep obviously does this to a level where one of them becomes almost like a central midfielder, but it's a similar tactical concept of trying to provide numerical superiority in the center while maintaining width. So that was interesting, and Pepe had a decent game. I think he's also getting his confidence back a little bit now. Saka obviously had a great game, scored a good goal as well, and he's been a catalyst for Arsenal over this time when they've been on a decent run of form. So I think that, some of the criticism that Arteta got earlier on in the season was unwarranted, because the table is so tight this season that you can lose 2 or 3 games and lose maybe 5 places in the table, So, and conversely, win 2 or 3 games and shoot up 4 or 5 places in the table. So given that it's that tight, I think Arsenal do have the quality to maybe make it to the Europa League, and we saw a little bit of that quality in this game.
David, do you think Arsenal is settled and will continue to be on the ascendancy or not?
It's a good question. I think there's definitely some positive signs. I was really impressed with them against Southampton, and the United game was just, I think, a little bit of a disappointment. I think they have shown some flexibility as a team, which this season, which I think is good as well. I think when we think of Arteta's Arsenal, we think of possession heavy. We expect them to get sort of 60% possession. That's pretty standard for them. I thought it was interesting to note how against Southampton and United, they tried playing not necessarily on the counter as much, but they certainly looked to play a little bit more directly and quicker than they had done in other games. So we talk about them being settled. I think there's definitely a confidence in them to start being a little bit more flexible tactically. Yeah.
I think if you remember in the last pod, we talked about how just absolutely ruthless their schedule is going to be. And I imagine if you asked any Arsenal fan, would you want to go one win, one tie against some top 6, top 7 teams? They take it in a heartbeat. So I think kudos to them on that. They've got Wolves coming up, Aston Villa, Leeds, Benfica twice, Man City, and then Leicester. I mean, that's just a murderer's row. So they've, it'll be interesting to see how things settle. Pepe is starting to show some signs of improvement. It'll be very interesting to see how their new pickup and how much it impacts their midfield. I thought their midfield was sort of getting settled, but we'll find out in the next 30 days is the key takeaway.
Well, I've been really impressed with Emile Smith-Rowe since he's come into the side. Yeah. And I think that the Odegaard signing is a really great sign because it's going to allow Smith-Rowe a little bit more. It's going to take some pressure off of him for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think that's vital for a young player who's just come straight into the team like that. So that'd be an interesting one to watch, see how Odegaard comes in and impacts him. And like you said with the schedule, yeah, that's a really difficult schedule. And I think that when you're playing difficult team after difficult team after difficult team, it can be taxing on you, not just physically, but mentally as well. And if things aren't going well, it's how you pick yourself up before you play the next difficult team 3 days later. And where are you after that run of games where, let's say you've got an easier run of games afterwards, have you managed to weather the storm and can you reset yourself and play against those potentially easier teams the way that you should be able to? So that'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see for sure.
Harshal, any quick thoughts on Southampton? There seems to be Southampton with Ings and Southampton without Ings in terms of results. They've got Man United coming up, and then they're going to be playing the Wolves, believe it or not, on Thursday and Sunday as part of the the FA Cup 5th round, and then Premier League match. What's your take? I mean, are they kind of where they belong in terms of being in 11th place right now?
No, I wouldn't say they belong in 11th place. And I've said, this is something I've said earlier as well, that when everybody's fit, Southampton can beat anybody in the league. Mm-hmm. But they've really struggled with injuries to key players. I think if both their first choice fullbacks, for example, Ryan Bertrand and Kyle Walker-Peters, are out injured at the moment. Mm-hmm. And they don't really have cover. Jan Valery is an 18, 19-year-old kid. Jake Wilkins is actually a centre-back playing out of position at left-back. So they don't have cover in the full-back areas. They don't have a lot of cover in midfield as well, where I think it's Ibrahima Diallo who's been, he was signed in the summer, but it's taken him some time to adapt. I think he had an injury as well, but now he's having to play. They've lost Oriol Romeo to an injury as well, and he's been really key to that central midfield alongside James Ward-Prowse. Ings has been fit, unfit, so there's the only issue I see with Southampton is that they need to build up the squad a little bit in terms of depth. They tried to do that in this window. They pushed really hard for Brandon Williams, for example, to come on loan from United because he could cover both fullback positions, but United haven't let him go out on loan. They pushed really hard for Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Again, similarly, can cover both fullback positions, can cover midfield as well. But it seems as though it's been confirmed that Maitland-Niles has actually gone to West Brom on loan. So they've not really been able to bring in the cover that they need. So I think that is what is going to hold them back, especially because, again, the nature of the season is such that you are going to see injuries and COVID and all of that is going to cause a lot of disruption. So if you don't have enough quality on your bench, then, I would have loved to see Southampton, and I'm not saying that it still can't happen, but I would have loved to see Southampton sort of maintain their early season form and position on the table. But given the injury problems they've had, yeah, I guess a top 10 finish would be a great one for them this season.
Good. David, what is your impression of the Tuchel transition been like for Chelsea?
Yeah, it's been it's an interesting couple of first two games or so. I think we've seen a clear effort to put a distinct style. In the first game was sort of death by 1,000 passes without little, with little to show for it, and that was, I wouldn't say that was necessarily expected. He has a more possession-based style than Klopp, and I think that because of his career where he followed Klopp at Mainz and he followed Klopp at Dortmund, I think people are sort of expecting to see that style, and he certainly does have that in him. That there will be pressing and counter-pressing, but it was interesting to see just how pass-heavy it was. There was a lack of forward movement, particularly in the Wolves game. I think there was a lot of lateral passes in that game and little movement in, not just necessarily in the final third, but in the central areas, in the half spaces. There wasn't a lot of players dropping in and out, and Wolves were happy to sit in a mid to low, really a low block. And when you're playing against a team that's doing that, you've got to have sharp movement in the final third, and there was a lack of that. I think against Burnley, Burnley were going to play in a similar style to what Wolves are doing, albeit with a different formation, but they did a much better job, Chelsea, that time of creating chances with a similar amount of possession as well. And I think they were good value for that 2-0 win.
Okay. Any thoughts, Harshal, on Chelsea? He's had 6 days, 7 days. He probably still doesn't know where the file cabinet's and barely knows where the bathroom is, much less expecting him to transform tactics for a talent-laden team. But any observations from your point?
The fact that he had one training session, that he was there for 24 hours before the Wolves game, and still managed to get his the way he wanted to play out, and managed to sort of communicate that to the players, could be seen on the pitch at Stamford Bridge. I think that was the most number of passes by a team in their first game for a manager in the Premier League ever since Opta started keeping statistics. And I think, as David said, it was. I think Chelsea made more passes in the first half of that game, around 420 odd, than some teams make in the full 90 minutes of some matches. So that, as David said, it is going to be a possession heavy style, because that is what he has been sort of known for. But he does have the other sort of side of things in his locker as well. And another thing which you need to remember about Tuchel is that he's not really wedded to a shape as such. We've seen a back three, a sort of 3-4-3, 3-4-2-1 in these two games, but don't be surprised if he turns up with a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3 in the next game, because he is extremely flexible with regard to formation. He does tailor his approach based on the team that he's going to face, as well as obviously the players he has at his disposal. We've not seen N'Golo Kante yet play under him, and he's actually spoken very highly about N'Golo Kante. He tried to sign Kante for PSG when he was the manager, so I do expect to see Kante come into the side. I expect to see maybe Werner play in the sort of position that he played against Burnley, where he is that sort of left-sided forward, sort of the role he played at RB Leipzig. I think that the best out of him. Mason Mount, I thought, had a really good game against Burnley as well, as a sort of roaming number 10. Callum Hudson-Odoi has been very good, I think, as a right wing back. Certainly offensively, he's not been tested defensively as much, but offensively he looks really good. He's holding the width, he's getting in behind. His crossing has always been good, and we can see that sort of and the impact it's having on Chelsea's attacking. So, and of course Marcos Alonso.
I'll say this.
Yeah,
sorry to jump in, Harshal. If you're a Chelsea fan, you're going to be pleased. Though the Burnley result certainly wasn't like setting the world on fire, you're going to be pleased that playing against another team, Wolves sat in, and so did Burnley. And I think that Chelsea struggled against Wolves to break them down, and I think they put in over 30 crosses in that game. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they put in over 30 crosses, which just sums up that you're struggling to break a team down if you're putting that volume of crosses in. I know they put a much lower amount. I think they put less than 20 in against Burnham. Still a high number, but not so much when you've got 70% possession. And you saw them. I mean, I think their XG was double in the Burnley game than what it was in the Wolves game. So you're seeing in a very short space of time someone clearly he's clearly putting some good work on the training ground.
Well, good. Well, let's turn our attention to the Tottenham Liverpool match. Harshal, what were your impressions of that game?
I mean, the reverse fixture was one where I sort of agreed with Mourinho's assessment to an extent that the best team lost in a way, because I mean, Spurs had a few very big chances in that game. In the reverse fixture at Anfield, which they lost, but I thought they should have scored the goals to win that game. In this fixture, I thought, I genuinely think Spurs are going to really struggle without Harry Kane, and we saw that to an extent in this one, because the way Mourinho has set up Spurs, he's done a good job from a defensive point of view, and that's always the case with Mourinho, that he does manage to get defensive improvement out of the teams that he manages. And it's the offensive side of things that has taken a toll. And Spurs have been completely reliant on Kane and Son to score their goals and create their goals. And you've lost, Spurs haven't just lost a guy who's scoring goals, they've lost their primary creator as well, with Harry Kane injured for maybe 3-4 weeks or so. So that, I think, the broader takeaway from not just the Spurs Liverpool game, but the Spurs Brighton game as well at the weekend, is that contrary to previous periods where Kane has been injured and Son has stepped up and scored the goals, I struggle to see that happening this time around, because who's going to supply the goals, or not the goals, but the bullets or the passes to Son to score? And I think that this period is going to be one where Spurs could actually struggle a bit, and there is actually a case to be made for Mourinho to bring back Dele Alli into the team, because he, I think, is the one player other than Tanguy and Ndombele who can provide that sort of creativity that Spurs are not going to have now with Harry Kane injured. So I'm actually a little bit worried for Spurs till the time they can get Harry Kane back fit on the pitch.
Well, and just keep in mind, Spurs are going to play Chelsea on Thursday, and then they're going to play Everton in the 5th round of the FA Cup, Man City, West Ham, Wolfsburg twice, right? That's a pretty full schedule.
Is it Wolfsburg or Wolfsberger? Who are they playing? I thought it was Wolfsberger they're playing.
I see Wolfsburg here.
It's Wolfsberger.
Wolfsberger.
Interesting. Okay. Well, the short of it is that they've got a pretty full plate without Kane. And I will say Tottenham, I did enjoy watching it under Pochettino. It's almost like, and seeing this transition reminds me of a Hobbit transforming to Gollum, where Precious is Mourinho, right? Where they've gone from this really progressive, exciting, expansive football to this, this crinkly shelled defense, which is very hard for the big six to unpick at times, but they're going to struggle in terms of creativity on picking apart teams below them. So, and they're not even doing well against, top 6 teams. So,
do you think though, Chris, that, I'm a Mourinho fan, but I'm not a fool. I can clearly see that things aren't going well right now. Do you think though that so much of that is Mourinho can't do what he wants to do, which is based on that defensive solidity, when you've got Serge Aurier, Matt Doherty, Eric Dyer had a shocker, Joe Rodon, who I'm a big fan of, made a mistake obviously for one of the goals. You've got, they've obviously got creative issues, and I'm not denying that at all, but you've also got defensive mistakes at the moment on a relatively consistent basis. And Mourinho can't do what he does unless you've got that watertight base.
Well, I guess the way I look at it is they've had 21 goals scored against them, which puts them in second or third best in the league in terms of goals allowed. So I would argue that I want to give Mourinho credit when he's due. He's done an outstanding job of that. It's about finding that balance, right? And I think they desperately need an Eriksen, right? I mean, they need a super creative type that can unleash. I think bringing Kane back is a great solution, but there's got to be a couple of other folks that are released too, because that the Son Kane show is starting to get a little worn. You take a look at the Golden Boot race; they're starting to fall back because teams they know how to play against them. They've got 34 goals scored, which still puts them in the top 6th, 7th in terms of goals scored. But to me, that's where I think if they're going to be serious for the top 6, much less the Champions League, is they're going to just have to increase goal output. They don't have the creativity. Do I blame that on the setup, or do I blame that on the recruitment? I don't know.
The thing is, though, they've been. I see what you're saying with they've not conceded that many, but the goals they've conceded are avoidable. And when they're playing the game of winning these fixtures on tight margins, on holding on to a 1-0 lead, for example, which is a risky business, but too often you've seen them concede that late equaliser or that late winner or something, which is an avoidable situation. I think the one that stands out just to my memory is the game against Wolves, where they conceded late on. I think it was maybe last month, and Ben Davies just lost his marker at the corner, and it was such a basic error of just letting your man go, and the whole thing is unravelled. I mean, even the goal that Brighton scored the other night, Ben Davies has been pulled away from the rest of his compact defence. He's been pulled away. They played a pass back inside. It's gone back into the half space where Ben Davies should have been, and they managed to work the ball back in for a cross and a goal.
But David, I think as a former and current goalkeeper, every goal is avoidable, right? I mean, everybody makes a mistake, and rarely is it one massive mistakes. Sometimes it is. Sergio Aurier has been very good at some massive mistakes, but it's a series of little mistakes along the way. And it's how as a team do you overcompensate for that, right?
But Mourinho's philosophy is all based on winning, getting goals by forcing the opposition to make the mistakes, which is why he would play with less possession. And so when you're making the mistake, it's not like they're giving the ball away. It's little defensive lapses and things that are pretty uncharacteristic, I think, for a Mourinho team. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that you look at they've lost against Brighton. They drew with Fulham, right? So we're not talking about big 6 teams here necessarily. Wolves in their former glory was Europa level, but they're not. They tied against Wolves, right, who are 14th or 15th in the table without a legit striker, right? They've tied against Crystal Palace. So they're not. I don't question whether Tottenham can get it done against a top 6 team on any given Sunday. What I question is that they've gone the Mourinho mold. Is there enough creativity to pry open the clams that are called the bottom half of the table?
I know you're a big, you were at least a big Lloris fan.
Oh, I'm a massive Lloris fan still, especially since
you don't think that there's an issue with the goalkeeper at Tottenham.
I don't see him. Last year
he had a stinker against Liverpool, right?
He had a stinker against Liverpool, but every keeper is going to have. I got Leno had a couple stinkers last year. Ederson, Alisson, that's part of the game, right? And for a keeper, you want to make 2 or 3 routine saves. You want to distribute the ball. You want to have 1 or 2 solid saves, and then you want to have 1 unbelievable save, right? That is the recipe for being a great goalkeeper. Lloris still checks those boxes on most game days. So, the Tottenham piece, it will be a work in progress. Let's keep this debate going. Do we want to say anything about Liverpool? Because I think Liverpool actually had a decent match against Tottenham. Harshal, do you want to?
We can talk about that. Let's not talk about the other Liverpool game.
Well, that one leads to the other. But Harshal, tell us where you think Liverpool is right now, given their week against Tottenham and against West Ham.
I think they look like they've found whatever was missing. I mean, these two games and the FA Cup game against United at Old Trafford, where they lost 3-2, but they did score the 2 goals. And that was the concern, right? Like the fact that Liverpool had suddenly stopped scoring and they weren't even creating chances. It's not that they were creating chances. There was a lack of creativity that we were seeing from Liverpool that we were not used to under Jurgen Klopp for the last 3 or 4 seasons or so. And so it came as a bit of a shock in that sense that Liverpool were not creating chances against teams for 3, 4, 5 games in a row. But I think they've managed to find that again. It's still a bit of, I'd say, a work in progress. I'm not saying that they've reached the heights of last season or the last couple of seasons, but in both the Spurs game and the West Ham game, I thought they were a lot sharper, they were a lot quicker, especially in the West Ham game. Obviously, we saw the second goal where I think 3 passes and they went the length of the pitch and Salah scored. Excuse me. You saw Curtis Jones come on at halftime against West Ham, have an immediate impact and set up Salah for the opener. And in the game against Spurs as well, we saw that. I think that it was just it's fine margins. The passes were a lot quicker. Were just that instead of taking 2 or 3 touches, they were taking maybe 1 touch or 2 touches at the most. There was a zip. There was a bit of a tempo to their passing, which was missing. And there's also, I mean, you also need to give credit where it's due to Jordan Henderson. I think he's playing in an absolutely unfamiliar position at centre back, and he's managing to do a pretty good job. I don't think he's been caught out while playing at centre back in terms of making a defensive mistake or he's not been caught out of position. I mean, against West Ham, I thought he would have a problem with the likes of Mikel Antonio, Thomas Souček in the air, and West Ham are one of the heavier sort of crossing sides with the likes of Cresswell providing deliveries from the left. Soufal from the right as well at right back is also a very good crosser of the ball. Souček has turned into Moyes' new sort of Fellaini.
No, don't say that.
I know everybody's comparing him, and obviously they're very different players. I think he's a much better player than Fellaini, to be honest, having seen Fellaini at United as well. But I mean, it's just that typical, they're both big sort of lads who play in midfield and get into the box. So there's a comparison to be made there, which is a lazy one that most people in the media have been making, and I'm a little bit guilty of that right now as well. But the point is that I thought that Henderson would really struggle against Antonio and Souček, but he didn't.
Yeah.
I was really surprised that he was able to hold his own. I remember
So
as much as obviously, yes, the creativity back, I think a lot of credit goes to Henderson to have adapted to an unfamiliar position and literally leading from the front as captain in that sense.
the couple notes that I'd make, I still think it's the 1 goal on 90 shots is the butterfly's wings that causes the typhoon in the subcontinent. It's random chaos theory. I just think that you're going to have these runs, and it's just, I hate using the term regression to the mean or finding one's mojo again. But the truth is that last season, the Liverpool got lucky, and Klopp said that they got lucky. The matches where they lost to Burnley 1-0 this year, or lost to Southampton 1-0, or tied Aston Villa, tied Newcastle 0-0 and West Brom 1-1. Those games just didn't happen. They were able to squeak out with a win, much in the same way that Man City right now seems to be squeaking out some 1-0 wins when the going gets tough. And I just think that Liverpool and Man City are really well designed to break the clamshell of the lower half of the table. more so than a Man United and a Leicester and a Tottenham are. And that's why I've said this since the beginning of the season. It's going to come down to Liverpool and it's going to come down to Man City. And I have no idea who's going to win. I don't know what the injuries are going to be, right? I don't know what COVID's going to impact that. So I want to ask you this question, David. Do you think that West Ham is at peak at the table? Have they already peaked for the season?
That's a really good question. I think it was disappointing performance because it was one of our worst performances of the season, and it was a moment that could have really transformed where the season's heading. I think if you ask most West Ham fans even at this point, what they'd hope for, a top half finish would be great. Top 8 would be brilliant. So I don't think that anyone's necessarily thinking we're suddenly going to, sneak into the top 4 or whatever. We've got a really difficult run of fixtures coming up where it's big team after big team. And so that will be a difficult period. And if you get through that relatively unscathed, who knows? I think we're probably at a point where, 5th place is probably maybe as well. We were in 4th, obviously, but I think 5th, we're looking down rather than up, is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems for the most part they're winning against the lower half of the table teams. They're kind of back and forth with mid-table, and they're losing against the teams, and that's probably why they're in 5th place right now. So I think that seems like a sensible position for them to be at this point. I really wish that they could have picked up another striker. What's your take on their most recent acquisition, their loan?
I think that although I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Lingard as a player right now, or necessarily as a fit for West Ham, what it does mean is that the board are listening to David Moyes in terms of what he wants, because it sounds like Lingard was a player David Moyes wants to bring in. And I've not been the biggest fan of our work in the transfer market over the last 18 months, particularly. I mean, generally under the Golden Sullivan regime. But I think that, hey, we're not rushing into a deal for a striker. That's maybe progress in a sense. Yeah, I'm disappointed. I think Yarmolenko has shown that he can potentially fill a hole there if Antonio gets injured again. But yeah, it would have been nice to have had a bit more cover there. Odemipo Odebeko, who is a young lad that I think we pinched from United. I think he's 18. He's playing for under 20, under 21s, or is it under 23s? Whichever one it is. It's our reserve team. And he's doing okay, I think. And I know that he came on in our FA Cup game back in January. So he might get a bit of a run, and that might not be a bad thing. He's quite highly rated. But yeah, it would have been nice to bring just someone in. But having said that, Chris, we're in a place right now where we're not going to get relegated. It'd be great to get into Europe. But if I'm honest with you, we would need a lot of investment in the summer if we were in Europe and we actually wanted to do something with that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Harshal, what's your take on the Leicester Leeds match?
I thought Leeds pulled off. I think it was a very important away win for Leeds, because Leeds have had so much media attention this season in the Premier League with the whole, obviously the whole effect around Bielsa. So, and it's a lot of it has been negative. A lot of it has been, people looking down on them to an extent, as to almost a sense of, you should know your place. You're a promoted side. How are you sort of having these thoughts of being able to go toe to toe with a Liverpool or a Manchester City, and having thoughts of being able to beat them and having more of the ball and attacking even when you're in the 95th minute with 6 or 7 players. So it flies in the face of what a lot of British, I wouldn't say British as such, but like the established British football wisdom is, which is basically when you get promoted to the Premier League, try and play it safe, try and get, scrape a few wins against the teams around you, try and hold out against sort of the bigger teams and just survive for the first couple of years before you can hope to build anything bigger. And I think Leeds are showing that you don't need to do that. You can come up and you can absolutely wow fans and supporters alike with a style of football that's unique and that's very well suited to the squad you have. And people talk about Leeds not being pragmatic. I think Leeds are being absolutely pragmatic, because I don't see them doing well in any other style of football than the one they're playing right now under Bielsa, because they've been playing that way for the last two seasons or so under him. All the players know their roles. And I mean, look at the improvement he's got from this group of players who are probably mid-level championship at best, other than the guys they've brought in, obviously. So in that wider context, I think this was a great result for them. They, again, we saw the staples of some of the staples that we've seen from Bielsa and the Leeds team, running off the ball, running. And when I say running, I mean just the amount of physical output you get from them. Their movement was sharp. Patrick Bamford has had a bit of a drought in terms of, I think he hadn't scored in the last 4 games, but he looked really sharp. He set up the first goal, and I think his finish for the second goal was outstanding. That's a top quality, world-class finish to be able to sort of get that amount of bend into the top corner from that angle with your left foot. So, and I think Stuart Dallas is one of the most underrated players in that Leeds side, probably in the Premier League, because he's played so many positions. He's played centre mid, he's played right back, he's played left back, he's played on the wing, and he seems to do everything well, so, and that's true for a number of players in that Leeds side, where you can put them anywhere and a lot of them will still put out a good level of performance. So from a Leeds point of view, yes, I think it was a very good win. It was a bit of a statement win in that, you know what, we aren't going anywhere. We can still sort of pick up wins against the big teams, against teams that are supposedly better than us. And yeah, they've been one of the best teams to watch in the league, and long may that continue.
Yeah, I found the match particularly interesting. I think the headline, or maybe the lead, was buried with Vardy not playing because in the opposite fixture, they feasted off of that high line. And I will say, I don't know how to quantify this, but I really feel like Leeds their team defense is maturing. I just feel like that those channels that are oftentimes opened in the middle or in the mid spaces, they aren't there as much as they were in the past. What I did find interesting is that Leicester did actually they had 18 shots, 8 of which were on target. Now Leeds had 8 shots, of which 7 were on target, and the expected goal was Leicester 1.73 and Leeds 1.81. So I guess what that says is that Bamford goal must have had an awfully low expected goal because they didn't have a lot in terms of XG. And then the PPDA, Leeds was at 7.23 and Leicester was at 8.2. So in terms of intensity and defensive play, it's fairly comparable. I will tell you, this was one of the most enjoyable matches for me to watch during the season, because it just seemed like there's always something going on, right? And the adjustment that Leicester made in the second half, which put Leeds on the back foot. It's nice having those sort of things happen, right? I mean, that's kind of it kind of had all those pieces, except for Leicester really not making a great match of it. So 3-1 win, well deserved. David, should we be worrying about Leicester any? Is this or are they going to bounce back right after a Vardy return?
Yeah, I think they'll be fine. I think that game was a blip. I think that Leicester got pulled into a style of game that they probably didn't want. It was quite open, which against the Bielsa side isn't really what you want. So I'm sure they'll bounce back. They're on a pretty good run up until that point as well. So even without Vardy.
Okay, good. Well, Harshal, I feel obliged for every podcast. We do have to talk a little bit about Man United, even though a loss and a tie is not not a headline you want to lead with. I don't know if there's any, at least the pundits aren't saying that they've completely fallen out of the race. I just think that maybe some realities come back. And quite honestly, the fact that we haven't even mentioned Man City at all, even though they're at the top of the table, they're just quietly manufacturing those 1-0 sort of wins when they need to, and then having some showcase wins. Help us unpack what's happening in Manchester.
I will say that I think David has jinxed United to an extent, because I remember last week he said that the title was United's to lose, and they've gone on to pick up
it.
United have picked up 1 point in the 2 games since then, so could be that you've jinxed it, David. But on a serious, the Sheffield United game, the thing is, we've seen that sort of thing happen with United on multiple occasions this season. And I mean, if you look back at Solskjaer's reign, not just this season, during his time in charge, where United are such because and I think this is going to happen as long as United stay a team who are reliant on individual brilliance and individual expression rather than a defined system of play. In that, you will have good runs of form when everybody's playing well, but that can immediately come to a halt if 2 or 3 key players of maybe 3 or 4 players are out of form, because you don't have those established patterns of play for the players to fall back on. And when there is when players are when they're not confident, they're not going to be able to pull off sort of off the cuff brilliant attacking moves. I mean, we're seeing Martial again endure a crisis of confidence, which I think this is the 3rd or 4th time during his time at Man United where he's gone through a spell where he just looks disinterested. He doesn't and there's not really a lot of output coming from him. Bruno Fernandes is having perhaps his first sort of barren spell since he arrived. He's not really scored, assisted, done anything in the last 4 or 5 games, I'd say. I think Rashford, for some reason, Marcus Rashford looks like he's not that confident in the final third, because I think there's a bit of indecision that's crept into his game. We saw that against Arsenal, where he had a brilliant chance where a cross came in. He was playing on the right, a cross came in from the left, and he had the opportunity to take a shot first time, but with a fairly open goal, but he chose to take a touch. And in that time, the keeper had come back, the defenders were back to cover, and the chance went away. There was another instance where he was running through on goal, and he either needed to choose to pass to the runner outside him or take a shot, but he chose to do neither. And again, the ball was taken away. So I think Rashford is also going through a little bit of a crisis of confidence. I was really surprised that Edinson Cavani didn't take the 2 chances he got in the game against Arsenal. There were 2 huge chances. I think the first one, had an XG of 0.7, which just tells you how big a chance it was, and the second one I think was 0.4. So, I mean, you have 1.1 XG worth of chances falling to Edinson Cavani. You'd expect him to score at least one of them. So it's I wouldn't say it's a blip. I mean, yes, it is a blip in the sense that United obviously lost to Sheffield United, picked up a point against Arsenal, sort of has stalled the momentum a little bit. But I think this was always coming, because United are a confidence team at the moment. There will always be these waves and sort of troughs where you will now, and I wouldn't be surprised if United aren't able to sort of come out of this and we see a few poor performances and maybe a couple of poor results in the next 3 or 4 games, because that is just how United have been under Solskjaer.
David, what's your take on the other side of town, Man City?
Yeah, they look really good. I don't know. They look, like you said, they are able to put out the results when they need to at the moment, but then at the same time, there's been a couple of blowouts as well. Right now they look super strong, and they'll be a difficult team to stop. But having said that, I think they're on like a club record at the moment level of consecutive wins.
I think it's 13 wins in a row or something like that.
Yeah. So surely by law of averages, someone's got to give at some stage. So who knows if the teams around them can start to pick up a little bit of form, like you said, Harshal just said about waves, peaks and troughs. We'll wait and see if City can keep up this level for the entirety of the season.
Yeah, in the next month, Liverpool, Tottenham, Arsenal, Man United, West Ham are going to have some things to say about those streaks. So they're going to have a pretty. Seems like every team is having a difficult schedule in the next 6 weeks. We're really getting into the business end of the season. As far as the league table goes, any interesting observations there?
I just think the general cluster of teams, and we spoke about Southampton earlier being in the 11th, but realistically, they could be above West Ham in a couple of weeks' time. So I think if you're looking even just away from the title picture, it's certainly interesting in that side of things. I think we're starting to see a little bit more of a distinct bottom group. It looks like Burnley are going to pull away from it. I think they've shown enough. That Newcastle win was huge. Be interesting to see if they can build on that.
How about you, Harshal?
Yeah, as David said, there's this little group of clubs from say 5th down to 10th, 11th. Everton, obviously West Ham, Arsenal, Chelsea, Southampton, Aston Villa, all these clubs. I mean, all of these teams could be in the running for Europe in one form or the other, whether it's Europa League or Champions League. So, and it's that sort of season where, as 3 or 4 good games can move you up the table, 3 or 4 bad games can sort of take you down somewhere, 4 or 5 places. So it'll be interesting to see how all of these teams are able to cope with that expectation, with that sort of that they could be in a European spot potentially by the end of the season, given how tight it is, that they may not need to have excellent campaigns. You can have a pretty average campaign, I think, this year and still make it to a Europa League spot. So that is obviously one thread I'm going to keep track of. And towards the bottom of the table, yeah, as David said, the Newcastle win is huge. I think it's done a lot to pull them out of trouble. And I thought that game itself was quite interesting from Newcastle's point of view, because Newcastle played a midfield diamond. I never thought I'd say that under Steve Bruce, where they played with a midfield diamond. They played with a lot more possession, with a lot more intent, with a lot more attacking threat. And people are putting that down to the arrival of Graham Jones as an assistant from Bournemouth. And apparently he's had a lot of input on the training ground and helped sort of devise this. So it'll be interesting to see if Newcastle can keep that going. Brighton, obviously, big win against Spurs. I think they've kept 3 clean sheets in a row now. So they've been, and according to me, they've been one of the most unlucky teams in the league this year. If you look at expected goals, expected points, definitely by those metrics, they have been, but they've not done well because they've not scored goals and their finishing has been really poor. So I want to see them do well, hopefully, if they can sort of build on these performances. And otherwise, from a relegation point of view, I think Fulham are going to give it a good fight. They look a little more tenacious and there looks to be some sort of fight there. West Brom, Sam Allardyce, you really never know with Sam Allardyce if he can pull off another one. And even though, yes, Sheffield United pulled off a shock win at Old Trafford, they're not going to survive. So it's going to be Sheffield United and 2 others. Looks like Fulham and West Brom at the moment, but don't discount either of those 2 being able to make it out.
So I want to change gears to talk about the transfer market. And I think the big headline is the lack of transfers for the most part. Keep in mind that in last January, there are about 242 million euros on 88 arrivals spent. So far this year, it's 47 million euros on 32. Europe is in the same position. In the Bundesliga, it's 41 million versus 196 last year. In La Liga, it's 31 million versus 152. Serie A is even more sparse. 215 million last January, 17 million this year, right? And Ligue 1 has only got 18 million compared to 124 million euros. So not much money being spent. Are there any transfers to chat about now as we are about to wrap up the pod?
I think Liverpool doing a little bit of business on the last day is interesting. I think they needed to. And I think the John Matip injury forced that hand a little bit. So I'm excited to see how Ozan Kabak does in the Premier League, and really interesting to see Ben Davies come up from Preston as well. I wonder what that means for Nat Phillips' long-term future, because I think with all centre-backs fit, that would leave them with 6 in total. I think that's a little bit unfair on Nat Phillips, because I've actually been relatively impressed with him. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But yeah, certainly excited to see Kabak play.
Good. Harshal, any other notes on the transfer market?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was to be expected given COVID. Just clubs' finances have taken a hit to a massive extent. From a player point of view, in terms of new arrivals, I mean, I'm gonna see how Willian Jose goes at Wolves. He's been brought in on loan from Real Sociedad to fill the void that Raul Jimenez has left since his injury. So he started the last game in the Premier League, but I want to see if he can have an impact and if Wolves can benefit from having a proper number 9, because I mean, he's an absolute unit. I mean, when you look at him on the pitch, he has the physical presence, I think, to be able to play in the Premier League, to be able to carry out a lot of the responsibilities that Jimenez had for Wolves. So it'll be interesting to see if he can adapt and if he can help them sort of climb up the table, because they're far off where we expect them to be usually over the last couple of seasons. So that, and along with obviously the 2 transfers that Liverpool have almost, I think, sort of sealed on the last day with Ozan Kabak and Ben Davies. So whether those guys can immediately slot in and help Liverpool in terms of their centre-back issues. So those are the maybe 2 or 3 players I'm looking at.
Beautiful. Well, we'll leave it there today, gentlemen. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, Moneyball for Football, Opposition Analysis plus Eye Candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Please subscribe to Thinking Fan Football Club on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. For this week, bella ciao, ciao ciao.